Ladies and gentlemen, let's imagine you are trying to build one of the most powerful technology models in human history using only good intentions and donations alone, while your competitors have billions of dollars, massive infrastructure, and unlimited resource. Of course, how are you going to sustain for the long run? And we as the opposition team believes that this house does not regret OpenAI's transition forward towards a for-profit structure. And ladies and gentlemen, before we could go any further, we would like to have a rebuttal. We as the opposition team believes that the cap profit model proposed by the opposition team is sustainable. But, however, we believe that it is not profitable. Earlier, the government team stated that in their stance on their point B, where their board is held by non-profit board, of course the model can sustain. But as proposition stated that it is financed by grants, donations, business activity that look like corporate partnerships and sponsorships. Okay, alright. But donations, grants, partnerships and sponsor, we believe in big models like these, finances from proposition stated are not equitable to stakeholders and investors' finances. The organization specializes in building AI and improving AI models, which needs massive funding. And who has the massive funding? The stakeholders, ladies and gentlemen, the investors, the entrepreneurs, ladies and gentlemen. Secondly, the proposition have stated that they will use debts and loans anyway. Let me remind you, ladies and gentlemen, debts are cruel. It has interest rates. It increases the amounts you have to pay back, and you are trying to sustain through donations, through grants. We believe it's not ideal. When you are trapping yourself in debts and loans, you surely has to have a massive funding. You surely need massive funding, ladies and gentlemen. And we believe if they are trapped in debts and loans, it would just die out, ladies and gentlemen. And also, not just from models of finances like these, donations, grants, etc. It's not as impactful as the stakeholders' finances. Would you mind an AI model run by donations? How? May I ask how? These AI models span across gadgets, span across users, span across regions, span across networks, etc. It has wide network range. How do you make it sustain plus improve based on donations alone, ladies and gentlemen? Of course, business demands improvement. Business demands innovation. Of course, donations is not as impactful as investors. Proposition has also stated that the board of directors doesn't depend on how much these stakeholders invest, but they are handpicked by non-profit board, which probably care more about pro-socialness. Okay, how do you define pro-socialness? Pro-socialness can mean anything. Either it is only supporting a community or movement, or they are only appear human. They sound human. The outputs are human. What does AI stand for, ladies and gentlemen? Let me ask a question. Artificial intelligence. We, as the opposition team, surely believes that intelligence is not the same as being human. Would you prefer an AI model being your friend, or an AI model that can help you? Of course, this is an important question to frame it this way, ladies and gentlemen. And we as the opposition team believes that the AI models, the intelligence models requires massive financing. Now, and we also believe that by having these for-profit investors, by having these for-profit financing models, investors and stakeholders, it is important and necessary to scale innovation, to compete globally, and to deliver AI benefits to society at large. Now, let's us jump into our first argumentation. Our points of argumentation. Of course, AI development is absurdly expensive. Modern AI, it's not like a university research anymore. Training AI model requires data centers, requires elite researchers, requires safety teams and legal or compliant operations. Of course, non-profit funding model is unstable for this scale. Of course, as the proposition team stated, they will depend on donations and grants. We believe that they will only depend on donations and grants. And not only that, we would like to provide more factors. AI models scale slower. Of course, by just depending on these grants and donations, it would make these developments, improvements, innovations for AI models will scale slower. This will make them lose talent to competitions, and this would make them fall behind companies with stronger capital access. In reality right now, AI model is now an industrial scale competition. The for-profit model allows long-term investment, sustainable funding, etc. Of course, the AI model, which is now an industrial scale competition, cannot survive on donations or grants alone, ladies and gentlemen, mind you. Now, of course, without sufficient or effective capital, OpenAI collapses competitively. It makes AI leadership or AI competition shift towards model improved by monopoly, big corporations which monopolize these competitions, which have and monopoly effect, influence on these AI competitions, ladies and gentlemen, and etc. Moving on to our second point of argumentation. Profit helps accelerate useful information. We as the opposition says profit is not evil, ladies and gentlemen. We as the opposition team says that profit is not evil, ladies and gentlemen. Profit creates incentives. This helps to compete in quality. This helps the AI organizations and companies to compete in quality, to improve products, and to expand accessibility. Let me focus on the last point, to expand accessibility. Why did AI suddenly become accessible to ordinary people? Because these companies or organizations had incentives or helps to commercialize by stakeholders and investors, ladies and gentlemen. This requires them to deploy widely and to integrate to daily life. Such example is like accessibility, productivity, research, and education. Research and education. Surely the AI model used is not a friend or human model. It's an intelligence model, ladies and gentlemen. This requires to make the intelligence model requires big incentives, requires big financing, ladies and gentlemen. Moving on to our last point of argumentation, we are talking about OpenAI here being non-profit. Let's just think simply. Models of AI is not just ChatGPT. OpenAI competes with Google. OpenAI competes with Meta, etc. Even if OpenAI switched to non-profit, competitors wouldn't follow. Of course, it's not the ideal way for competitors to follow the model by OpenAI to become non-profit. If OpenAI voluntarily switches to non-profit financing model, it will lose the race, it will lose researchers, and it will lose power and efficiency and etc. Because it's all about funding, ladies and gentlemen. Can you find an AI model that survives on grants, on donations? We didn't think so. Of course, and by these reasons we